Hey everyone, it's Louisa Tanner-Munson from Feel Good Astrology, and I wanted to welcome you here today to have a little chat about the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, and with a little bit of a reference to Uranus, to kind of mark the passage of time as Saturn and both Jupiter are going into the sign of Aquarius in this week in December 2020. So as I'm recording this, Saturn has already just entered Aquarius. So Saturn went into Aquarius at 5:04 a.m. That's GMT, or Universal Time, on the 17th of December. Jupiter's about to go in on the 19th at 13:07 Universal Time, and then on the 21st of December, so the day of the winter solstice, at 21 minutes past 6, both Saturn and Jupiter are going to come together in a grand conjunction. Now, Saturn and Jupiter have different patterns around the ecliptic. So from our perspective, it takes Saturn approximately 29 and a half years to go from one point on our ecliptic. So let's say from 0 degrees Aries right the way back to where it was at the beginning. So for instance, that's why astrologers refer to people having their Saturn return when they get to about 29 and a half. That's when Saturn returns to the place it was at the time, place, and date of your birth. Similarly, Jupiter also has quite a slow orbit from our perspective. So it takes Jupiter around about 11.8 years to go from one point all the way around the circle of the ecliptic and back to the beginning. That's why the years of, like, say, 12, 24, 36, all the multiples of 12 seem to fit in with a real sort of Jupiter time when we have a kind of lucky year. They do seem to be astrological turning points for us. So we've got these two cycles and these two energies of the planets, Saturn and Jupiter, and they appear to be polar opposites of each other. So Saturn represents, if you think about the way we perceive Saturn to be, it appears to be a planet that's surrounded by rings. And so for us, and mythologically, it represents all sorts of things to do with restrictions and management of situations. And I will look a lot deeper into this. And Jupiter, by contrast, is the biggest planet, known planet in the solar system. I say that very purposefully because things are changing all the time, and we recognize more and more bodies out in our solar system. It does happen, but Jupiter appears to be almost like a sun. It's huge, it's magnificent, and so it represents our hopes, our expansion, our potential, and feelings of well-being. So we've got these two planets that appear to represent slightly different things. And then we've got them going into the sign of Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is ruled by the planet Uranus. So we will be mentioning Uranus in this because there is, there's a backstory. But Aquarius is typically, it's the 11th sign of the zodiac. It's typically associated with co-creation. So all the things we do together. So the idea of working as a team, the idea of the brotherhood and sisterhood of man, the idea that we're all in this together, that we all rise with the same tide, all those ideas. It's very anti-hierarchical. The sign of Aquarius is very much, I guess, it represents the age of Aquarius, the idea of sort of like hippie notions. It's also very much linked into the idea of us all working together to achieve a goal, and to have some sort of form of equality. The idea that if one of us fails, we all fail. That's a very sort of Aquarian ideal. Aquarius also rules technology and futurism. So in that, we've also got those themes. Now, to the untrained eye, or like if you were to ask any person this year about the themes of what's been going on in the world, and there would be some very, very strong themes, and one of the themes I think that would come up is the idea of socialism, and equality and diversity. That's been coming into play for a really long time, but it's taken a lot more of the news space in recent times. As I'm recording this is December 2020. the idea of the cancel culture has kind of mysteriously come up and gained prominence this year. So that I think the idea being is that if you say something that comes across as stereotypical, anti something, like you know, that anti-diverse, you know, something that's really not diverse and would seem to offend people, then, you know, other people say, right, you're cancelled, we don't need to listen to you anymore. So there's this idea of kind of at the same time, there's these growing ideas of freedom and generosity to each other and us all working together. And at the same time, there's this idea that, and if you don't play ball, then we're going to punish you. You know, we're going to censor you. We're going to come down hard on you. We're going to take away your privileges. We're going to cancel you. And so is that really freedom? It is one of the thoughts that I've been having this whole year. You know, is this true freedom when in us being able to express ourselves, we may run the risk of being cancelled for sharing what's going on inside. So I think all these ideas have been distilled down to almost a dangerous level, but that is the kind of energy that you might have when you've got a massive planetary year ahead of you. So let's just think, like, if we just take a step back before we go into the Jupiter and Saturn. I want to thank anyone that's watching. I can see I've already got a couple of viewers. I don't normally live stream straight to YouTube, so I'm just going to say a big hi. I've just put the chat box up, so it'll be interesting I've got 3 now. Woo! That's a lot for me. So, you know, if you do have a question at all, if I can see the chat, I will respond. If I don't, I will look it up after and I will respond to you in a private message or in the thread below this video. So thank you anyway, I really appreciate it. So yeah, let's take a step back to this time last year, actually. So say December 2019, we were already starting to feel the energies of Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto together, all kind of slowly coalescing into a great big conjunction. And as 2019 passed into 2020, we had the themes of Saturn and Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto, Jupiter and Pluto, all 3 of them together, then them all going into kind of retrogrades and then re-aspecting each other. And so it's been a continuous dance of like 1 step forward, 2 back, a step forward, 3 back. And it's been very, very sort of difficult for anyone to sort of understand and narrate, you know, what's going on in this year. The themes of Pluto are complete control, dominance, and then we've got Saturn, so limitations and micromanagement, and also to do with wealth and our careers. Saturn is very much about that. Jupiter, about our freedom, our ability to thrive. All of those have come into play. Jupiter is also about spreading things, and so the idea of super spreaders and pandemics. If you think of Jupiter like expansion, and then Pluto, control, dominance, death, and going into hell, being locked up. You've got, you know, all the recipes for what's happened in this year. But as of last month, Jupiter and Saturn were both clear of Pluto, and they're not going to be reconnecting with Pluto for a really long time. So now the effort and impact is all about Saturn and Jupiter. That's where our interest lies right now. So we're back to present day. So Saturn's just moved into Aquarius today. And so we need to think about the themes of restrictions, management. If you think of managers in top companies, you've got like the CEO types, which are like the visionaries. They're not necessarily the people that manage. They're the people that set the intention and set the inspiration for people to move forwards. And then underneath that, you've got a layer of micromanagers, the people that do the shittiest jobs or the jobs that involve possibly being a bit mean to people, you know. And so you've got this whole level of VPs, department managers and things like that, or police force. Sorry to, you know, tar all the police with that kind of brush, because I'm not meaning to. But if you think about the civil servants around the world that regulate everything, they're doing the jobs of the people at the top. And these guys are kind of like, that's a really Saturn kind of career, you know, like managing others, teaching, doctoring, all sorts of medicine, law enforcement, military. It all comes under a kind of Saturnine effect. So we've got this whole idea of managing ourselves, and it's for the good of everyone, and it's for your own good, because, you know, if you're not managed, what's going to happen? It's very parental, you know. So Saturn is definitely a parent archetype and comes up in the idea of fathering and paternalism. Now, for those of you that are interested in transactional analysis, I've actually done you know, I've spoken about this on my podcast, Feel Good Astrology. You can find it on Spotify. And it looks at the roles of Saturn, the Sun, and the Moon in the sort of roles in your own psychology. But let's take Saturn to represent paternalism. We've got Saturn coming into the sign of Aquarius, and Aquarius is about futurism, technology, about almost like one size kind of fits all and appeals to everyone. It's kind of like a socialism. So it's no surprise that right now there appears to be a bit of a battle going on in America, you know, about is America a socialist place or a capitalist place? And what are the ideas of socialism? I know we've seen this bright and lovely idea of what socialism is, and it means that everyone wins. In reality, I'm not sure I've actually seen socialism win without also taking some victims. So when you have this rollout of one size fits all, often there are lots of people that fall by the wayside. Or, you know, like when you have mass programs for anything, it suits most people, but it doesn't necessarily suit every person. So, you know, we've got some very big things to think about. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that there is technology rolled out for everybody, or the idea of it. And sure, we've seen that coming in this year with the idea of 5G being rolled out across the board, even though lots of people are up in arms about it and don't want it. So there is this idea of someone making an executive decision and not listening to others. Think about your parents when you grew up, you know, how they sometimes veto you and say, you know what, when you're my age, then you get to vote. When you're paying the mortgage, then you get to have a say. It's a bit like that. You want to make a change, become an MP. You want to make a change, become the president. So it's like you don't earn the right. We have got the right in our position, and we're going to make that decision. So I really see that Saturn and Aquarius could bring that out, and could be behind the idea of a mass vaccination program, in particular with tracking and tracing, and the ideas of trace and track apps on your phones and Big Brother watching you. It's very much, you're grounded. I'm going to watch your every move. You know, it really is about us being teenagers again. So there are those themes behind the scenes. Now, when you think of parents, and if you think of parental astrology or transactional analysis, like the idea of, you know, are parents inherently good? And how much force and coercion is okay for parents to use? That really comes to the idea of Saturn versus Jesus, which I've put in the title. I've seen a few people refer to Saturn very much as Satan, and Jupiter very much as Jesus, and I'll come to Jupiter in a sec. When I look at transactional analysis, you have the idea that as children, we could be freely expressed children or hurt children, and be acting out our characters from those positions. And similarly, with parents, you can have nurturing parents, supporting parents, and you can have punitive parents. And so you can manage your children in two different ways, or in a multitude of ways, but there are those two archetypes. There are the types of parents that allow their children to grow, mature, and make their own mistakes and learn from their own mistakes. And they stay very close to their children, like a guide by the side, and they're there to coach them, accept them, love them, and talk about the failures and work through it. And then there are those parents that are like, you know, this is how it is. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. Very much about boundaries and limits. And it's very difficult to see the other side. And so Saturn, I think, because of the role of responsibility, which I think Saturn is overall about, it's about responsibility. All of those jobs that I highlighted before, like military, medicine, teaching, governing, banking, it's all about responsibility. It's all about assuming responsibility for other people so that they can be free to do other things, or assuming responsibility because they represent some kind of system of thought that is deemed to be the right way. And at some level, we all have the fight of responsibility in our own lives. We all have this need to understand how we are responsible, where our responsibility starts and where it ends. And that's one of the themes I have seen across the board throughout the whole of 2020. people are becoming, they're growing out of their teenage years and they're becoming adults, like proper adults. We're adulting ourselves right now. The 2020 awakening has been about us becoming adults. And some of us still are at that stage where we want everything done for us. You know, we do want a medical system that's going to pick up the slack. And I have no problems with that. You know, we all should be free to make our own decisions. And there are also some people that are like, I'm glad that there is the medical system or the policing system or this, that, and the other. And I'm not going to leave everything to chance. I'm going to take responsibility for myself too. So very different approaches. So Satan, the idea of like Saturn in astrology tends to creep up in 7-year cycles. So around the age of 7, 14, 28, say, actually 29 and a half is actually when Saturn returns to where it was at the time, place, and date of our birth. That's known as our Saturn return. Now, most people have their butts seriously kicked at 29 and a half, you know, and a year either side. You feel it in the post. You feel the Saturn energies in the post for sure. And what happens is you start to realize where your responsibility and all the things that you've taken on board have imprisoned you. So see, there's that theme of imprisonment, like being caught in the rings of Saturn. Now, what is it that's imprisoned us? Often what we realize is we've developed a lifestyle that we can't afford, or that the costs of affording our lifestyle are too much and we're not prepared to pay them anymore. So often, if you think about, go back, if you know, if you're over 20 and you've been through your Saturn return, if you're in your 30s, 40s, whatever, think about what you were doing around 28, 29, 30. What were you learning? What were the difficult things? Because usually what happens is we hit our 20s, we're out of the home, and we think, right, screw everyone. This is who I am now. And we start proving who we are, and we start accumulating extra responsibility. We start getting more money, we earn, and we start expressing who we really are. And it's a real joy. And then by the time we get to 28, 29, we realize we've created a persona for ourselves that may or may not work. Lots of people around the age of 29 have a sort of nervous breakdown event, or get depressed, or kind of a bit stuck as to how they can move forwards. They realize that their life is so full that, and if you carry on going in the same direction, it might not yield your overall desire for life. And so you think, well, what can I cut back? I can't cut back this because I won't be able to survive. You know, it's a really big headache. And it's a really strong sort of thing about responsibility. Often people realize that the job that they've worked at since leaving school, it's just not for them. What they've studied is wrong, and they have to go back to the beginning. Or people who've been in a long-term relationship realize that the values that they got into that relationship for have changed, and that they're in the wrong relationship. That happened to me, actually, and the job as well. Lots of people have their first child around 29, 29 and a half. And of course, we have our second Saturn return at 58, around the age of 58. And so I've had so many clients, I can't even, you know, count how many, who became a parent at 29 and a half, and then at 58 became a grandparent. So they're going through the parental things, the idea of additional responsibility and what that means and how you change your life. So at 29, we're all dealing with this kind of onslaught of how to work with responsibility. And that's where Saturn, I think, gets kind of linked in with Satan, because it always comes as a really shocking exercise. Very few people go through a Saturn return first time round and ace it. You know, most people have taken on way too much, or have not done enough, and they learn a very painful lesson. And so Saturn seems punitive. It feels like you're being punished. If you've got a Pluto thing going on at the same time, then oh my goodness, that is just unbearable. You know, it just feels like your life is being crushed or held back. When Saturn goes over your sun or your moon, you often feel very restricted, like your finances tend to be curtailed. You don't have enough money, you don't have enough energy. Illness can, you know, crop up with the Saturn cycle. So it comes across as Satan. Now, what happens when we get through the other side? Wow. For those of us that listen to our lives and are kind of really open to life and wanting some kind of transformation, we get to the other side, and, you know, once we've had time to process it, we realize the absolute gift And I really mean it, the gift of having that awareness, having that awakening. We realize, okay, I was on the wrong path. And yes, it felt like hell when Saturn came in and kicked my butt. However, now I freed myself up for this new experience and this other new experience. So the themes of Saturn definitely feel like Satan. And right now, Saturn appears like, when we think about what's been going on in the world, so many people are beginning to see that the constructs of our world in this 2020 pandemia reality, we're starting to see that a lot of our ruling, legal frameworks that we appear to be forced into or expected to comply to, we're starting to realize that they might be the workings of Satan or the devil or hell itself. We might be thinking that what's been set up is our imprisonment. And I know that there are lots and lots of people talking in those terms. Funnily enough, at the same time, there are just as many people seeing these restrictions and these edicts and ideas on how we need to live as being the savior of humanity. So we have got this this is the devil, this is Jesus kind of thing going on. You know, so many people see the masks as the savior, and the people who are saying you should wear masks, you should socially distance, you should do this, that, and the other. People are actually seeing that as a God-given, like it's we should all do it. It's the kind thing. It's the right thing. And then there are other people that are saying, well, I understand the idea might be that it's kind. However, it's an affront to my humanity and my trust in the faith and bounty of my immune system. So another theme that I really see with Saturn is a lack of trust in the natural world. You know, that, you know, systems come in to manage us because there is a suspicion and a lack of trust that we can cut it ourselves, that we can cut it and make it into the real world. So I'm really delighted. I can see 3 people are still actually watching me. So just going to give you a little wave and say thank you. It's nice to know I haven't switched you off just yet. So let's have a look at Jupiter then, because Jupiter is about like excess and growth and hope and optimism. And so with Jupiter going into Aquarius, again, we've got the themes of futurism, technology, the idea of like where we go one, we go all. That's something that's come up quite a lot with the Q movement and QAnons. We've got the idea of freedom, peaceful protests and things like that, all very much Jupiter things. But if you think of this, the idea of expansion, that's Jupiter. It also expands the things you don't want to see. So Jupiter also shows us and inflames us, and, you know, almost sets off a bomb behind us. You know, it highlights everything in such a way that it can create pain too. Like if you grow and grow and grow and grow, and you don't stop, or you don't make sure your form can take it, you could grow out. I'm trying to think of my sourdough. I'm not very good at making sourdough, and sometimes I just get the balance wrong. And you know, you're creating this beautiful dough that's going to bake in the oven, and if you get the recipe wrong, it grows and grows and then kind of folds in on itself. You know, when you make a souffle or you make a sponge and it's growing, but it doesn't have enough to keep it in its form, or you take it out just before it's ready, you know, just before it's heated up enough. So we have the clear idea that when we grow into an idea and expand into an idea, that in itself can actually be very destructive. The idea of cancer, the idea of something growing inside us that we can't control, that is kind of a Jupiter thing, really. So the two of them are very much hand in hand. You know, one is moving us forward, you know, with the expansion and the movement, the onward movement into technology, into equality, into us all working together, us finding socialism maybe, or finding our own way without the need for it. I mean, that's the one that I would go for, actually, personally. And then we've got Saturn, the structure that comes around the side. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a punitive one, but at the moment, it damn well appears to be. So we've got those two things going on. And Jupiter is often represented by Jesus, or, you know, the idea that Jupiter is forgiving, is all loving, is magnificent. Jupiter is also very proud. and the pride comes before a fall. So very strong Jupiter types are often very exuberant. You can't, they'll say yes to everything, and then maybe overextend themselves. So sort of complete Jupiter types, you can't necessarily trust 100%, no matter how beautiful their vision might be. They overpromise and underdeliver. So the idea of Jupiter and Saturn together is an important balance, I think, to understand. And we're given the chance this year to work out how we do that for ourselves. We're seeing all the archetypes playing in the big world, and we're becoming part of this great big social experiment, to see how people comply, or how people stand strong and firm in themselves and come to their own agreements. In most cases, this is a time when we need to make good with the God within ourselves. So where I want to go now is a bit of the mythology around it. So to do that, we need to go back in time even further before Saturn, and that is to Uranus. And Uranus is important because Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, and Aquarius is the sign that they've both gone into. So there is an Aquarian theme. So Aquarius is like, Uranus, I've actually done a podcast on it. If you go to Spotify, Feel Good Astrology Spotify, there's a podcast about who is Uranus, and let's look at Uranus a little bit more. But he's basically like God of the sky, God of the universe. He is like the all-encompassing energy of air. And if you think about airwaves and the idea of 5G or technology, smart city, smartphone, smart this, that, and the other, chips in us, it's all information that is kept in the ether or moved around in the ether. It's about rapid enlightenment. It's no surprise so many people are announcing that they are channels, because lots of people have kind of come online in this year, come online in their heads and their hearts, and they're connecting to God or their soul or their higher self or something else completely. But we're all almost, there's a lot of sort of telepathic energy going on right now. So I'm not surprised by that. But Uranus was a very, very big energy, and Uranus was in a relationship with Gaia, so Earth. So we had the heavens and the Earth coming together. And from that, this is like the Greek and Roman mythology. They've got different names according to which ones you go with. But let's just stay with Uranus and Gaia for now. They had children. So Saturn was one of the children that Uranus had. So they had like a whole bunch of them, like the Titans and just loads. And Saturn was one of the children. Now, Uranus, being so big and magnificent and kind of ruling the universe, got a bit too big for Gaia, and the Earth goddess Gaia wanted to kind of castrate him or limit his power, and so spoke to some of her Titan sons and asked if they would help. And Saturn was the one that was just ready to castrate him, and so castrated him with a sickle or pretty sharp implement, and he castrated his dad, Uranus. So it's almost like he overthrew his dad. He took away his dad's power to create, or tried to box in the creative power. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the Aquarian ideal of us all being in this place of magnificence and being created and switched on, and tuned into what's going on, the Uranus ideal of the age of Aquarius, that's all there. If you think about it in earthly terms, that would be the idea of smart city, smartphones, 5G, and this, that, and the other. So, we have the internet, which is like a 3D version of our 5D ideas of telepathy with the Akashic records. So we've got like these themes always sort of doubling up and being reflected in our etheric realms and also in our groundly space. So yes, Saturn was a badass and castrated his dad. And, so Uranus is in the background. Then Saturn married his sister, like you do. And his sister is called Ops. And together they were both gods of wealth and abundance and nature and resources. In particular, Ops, she's very much about, like, when you look at the position of Ops in your own birth chart, it shows where you are so absolutely determined to do something that you will find the luck. It's what you'll hold on to and what you'll make of a bad situation. It's quite a useful person to look at. She's great. So Saturn and Ops had some children. They're Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, Juno, Ceres, and Vesta, all the characters that we know from our solar system as planets or dwarf planets. And Saturn heard that at some point one of his children would usurp his power. And so he made sure that they weren't going to do that. And so every time one of his children was born, he ate them. And this is another interesting thing that's come up in 2020 as well. You know, I don't know if you've heard it or not, but there will be lots of people that watch this will have heard about people who are perceived as in charge of making the decisions around the world who eat babies. Really nasty thing. But it's an interesting thing that the idea that Saturn, who rules things, ate all his children to make sure that A, he stayed young, and B, that he wasn't usurped by the next generation and the next generation. He wanted to keep his power, and so he maintained his power by eating his children. Now, Ops got a little bit worried about this, and she gave birth to Jupiter in secret, gave Saturn a stone, pretending it was Jupiter. He ate it and thought he killed him. And so years on, Jupiter comes back, kicks his dad's butt, and makes him vomit out his brothers and sisters who miraculously all come to life. And so what we have is the overthrow of the system. So how interesting is that? So it's almost like history repeating itself a little bit. You have Uranus, this idea of expansion into the vastness of the universe, the connection with everything. And if you think about Earth and air, so Gaia and Uranus, if we like piece all this story together, and we think about us as humans, you know, we can be grounded and also children of the universe. I mean, that's a kind of cool thing. Saturn came in to ruin that by castrating his dad. Then he took over the natural system of earth and air. He overtook it and put his own rule in, and you think about his Saturn rings. Interestingly, if you look at Saturn looks almost like a prison. You know, he's in his rings, but at the North Pole, he has a hexagonal vortex flowing. So it's not even like flowing in a normal spiral. It's a hexagonal spiral, which is very, very bizarre. And I'm sure it has a particular meaning. And then you have the overthrow of Saturn. Now, what's going on right now? There are those themes going on, right? So isn't it interesting that as Jupiter and Saturn are going into the sign of Aquarius, that is ruled by Uranus, the ideas of freedom, us all working together, us being part of the new age of Aquarius. And there's this grand conjunction happening on the solstice. And I've recorded separately about the solstice, so it's worth having a listen to that if you're interested. Another little thing to bear in mind is that Saturn is also known for Saturnalia, the celebrations that happen around Christmas time. The Roman festivals, and in that there's a lot of free speech, joking around, presents, feasting, loads of feasting and drinking and stuff, but also role reversals. And that's an interesting one, because one of the things that has become very obvious to me is this kind of mirroring of situations that are going on in the very same way that I'm talking about the story of Uranus and Saturn overtaking Uranus, and then the Jupiter posse, the youngsters coming in and taking back their power and almost restoring it to how it was before with Uranus in charge, like returning to the natural order of things seems to be mirrored right now. Yeah, so suffice to say, these are huge, huge times. Now, if you're interested in knowing how these are going to affect you, if you go to my Feel Good Astrology podcast, I've recorded in the past a series of podcasts like Saturn in the first house, Saturn in the second, third, fourth, all the way through the 12 houses. If you know what your birth chart looks like, then, and you know where your Saturn is, if you look at that related podcast, like my Saturn is in my 8th house. And so I would listen to Saturn in my 8th house. You can also look at where Saturn is at the moment, according to your birth chart. So right now, I know that Saturn is going through my 3rd house. So you can actually listen to both those podcasts and get a much better idea as to what's going on. I'm about to record the same versions for Jupiter as well, so that you can look at what they might mean. And I've already recorded over a year ago Uranus through the houses. So just those on their own will give you a really good idea as to what's showing up for you. In particular, where Jupiter and Saturn are both residing right now in your chart is going to show you a huge area that's due to develop. And if you remember, you'll be developing and growing in responsibility, in adulthood, in this area of your life, by finding your own natural structures, and not growing so big that it cannot sustain itself. So it's like sustainability. I guess, yeah, these two are really an idea of finding a sustainable solution that's going to work for everybody. Now, at the start of this, I said I wanted to look at socialism and freedom as well. So I'm aware that in this year, we've had some very interesting themes about what makes us free. And so some people are saying, well, the price to freedom is just putting on a mask. The price of freedom is just, distancing yourself in a lockdown and then socially distancing yourself. And if you want your freedom, you just have to be responsible and wear a mask. And now it's like, well, the price of freedom now is to have a vaccine. What harm is that? Just take the vaccine, you can have your freedom. So there is this idea that if we're part of an agreed system, we can have our freedom, that we earn our freedom. At the same time, I'm just going to put that to one side right now. I have to say that's my least favored style. Not that I'm not helpful towards people. I have been following the lockdowns, even though I'm not 100% bought into them, So there's a conflict. That's an area for me to grow up, for me to grow some balls and to be able to articulate where I am. That's my job right now. And we all have our job to work out what this means to us and how far into this idea of medical socialism we're happy to enter into. Then there's these ideas of freedom. So there are people that are saying we don't need any rules at all. We need to be completely free. And, anarchism, or the idea of being completely free to rule yourself, has a terrible reputation. So I think the idea of being anarchic is somehow that you're unruly and wild and free, and that's an evil thing. I actually know lots and lots of anarchists, and I can say actually they're the most peace-loving people that I know in my own experience. It might be different for you, but actually I think the idea of it is to be free to be yourself whilst taking responsibility for the mistakes you make. So, if you in your free expression of who you are and in living your life, you have to be held accountable for where you cause harm to others, like deliberately cause harm to each other, and also consider accidental harm. It's a very, very strange thing. And so I really see this as the themes going forward, is how do we learn to express ourselves whilst taking responsibility? Massive themes. So anyway, this is going to be work in progress. We're going to see what's happening. Jupiter's going to zip through Aquarius and go straight into Pisces earlier. I think sort of by late spring, early summer. Jupiter's zipped into Pisces, spends a bit of time there, comes back into Aquarius, and then, it's not hanging around. So Jupiter is kind of awakening us to all working together, which I think is a really great thing. And then going into the place of transcendence and unraveling and spirituality. So Jupiter, I think, is leading us out of the litigation of it and into a place of peace where we just master what's going on. Saturn's going to be in there for a while. Something that is interesting, I'm going to record another podcast about, is the ongoing Saturn-Uranus square, because obviously Uranus is part of this story, but pretty much for the next 12 months or so, Uranus and Saturn are going to be in a square to each other pretty much all the time. They come out of it ever so slightly for a week or two, and then they're back in it. So the tension represented by a square is control versus anarchic freedom. And so this really could be a time of civil war and unrest. One thing I would like to end this on, and that is the idea that of cancelling. I've been noticing over the last few years that I really used to identify very strongly with the idea of leftist philosophies, and the idea that we all stand together and we all help each other, and that it's all about finding freedom for everybody. And we do that by taking into consideration you know, addressing people in the way they want to be addressed. So we're talking gender issues, sexuality issues, also to do with health and our own situation, you know. So for instance, making life easier for people with perceived disabilities who have additional needs and things like that. And also race, obviously. You know, there's all these different areas that we can highlight and we can focus on, and create rules about. And what I've learned over this last year is where we actually need rules to tell us how to think and feel and what we can say. What we're actually doing, I think, is creating more falsehood. So people know what they're supposed to say, but people aren't actually being true to themselves. I really like the work of Brad Blanton, so I just want to quote, not word for word, but some of his philosophies. He really thinks that we need to be radically honest, and he's written a book called Radical Honesty, and I'd recommend it to anyone. But it's called Radical Honesty, and it's about telling the truth, like the complete truth, and sticking around to clear up the mess. And so, you know, when we're following all these ideas of what we can and can't say to all these different people, what's happening is our ability to work out how to be kind, how to be generous, how to be compassionate and loving to people is being shorthanded into a set of rules that somebody else has made, and that we feel enforced and coerced and manipulated into having as our own set of morality. Because if we don't, we're shamed or cancelled because we said the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong way. And it's arbitrary. It's just what somebody else has decided for us and made popular. I think it's entirely okay for us to be completely honest about how we feel about something, and stick around to have a conversation about it. I think that is actually where all the magic occurs. And that is where we turn hell into heaven. And that is where Satan stops having an influence over us and we become Jesus. We become a living model of loving each other, even though it might hurt. And another guy who gets really, really told off in the press is Jordan Peterson. And I actually quite like him because he says the truth, even though it hurts. And I was watching an interview with him the other day that said, but you're obviously a sexist or this, that, and the other because of your book. And you've got these 12 steps, which your 12 steps are the hardest to take and live by. And he said, being truthful all the time. And he explained that when you're truthful all the time as a habit, it's difficult. It is a struggle because sometimes you might have to share something that is going to need some clearing up. And you know, when you're not truthful about something, what happens is you're kicking the trauma down the road, because it will come out at some point, because where we're holding on to our truth and saying some kind of falsehood, we're creating a set of lies, a set of conditions, and they bind us a bit like Saturn's rings. You know, we then become imprisoned in our lives. There's no freedom in it. And we know at some point we're going to have to pay the costs of lying. And so he says, you know, the hardest thing to live by is being honest. So the idea of the cancel culture, I think, is really dangerous. And I think we're on a slippery slope. So I'm really hoping that as Jupiter zips through Aquarius and goes into the sign of Pisces, we can start realizing that the rules themselves are stopping us from learning and growing as people and knowing how we should be in different situations. I mean, what is wrong? Like, you know, I homeschool, you know, so we talk about all sorts of things at the dinner table or when we're out for a walk. And my kids have grown up like knowing that sometimes boys are together, girls are together, that mums and dads are together, and sometimes they split. And we've got friends with all different skin colors. You know, we've got a whole sort of like collection of people around us that all represent different ways of being, and we just have discussions about it. So like when my eldest says, you know, why are those two guys together when it's you and mum together? And we talk about, can two guys having kids together or two girls having kids together, can that work? And we talk about the biology of it, and I don't sugarcoat it. I say, well, according to our bodies, this is what works. However, we have a conversation about it, and you know, our love for each other and our generosity and our compassion and knowing what feels right to us should also be honored. And so it's a conversation. And I think we should all be grown up enough to allow each other to have a conversation. And so that's the kind of truth that I'm holding out for in this time of great social change, where I really think we've got it in our hands. And I really hope that the big systems that are forcing our hand on how we have to be, I hope they are relaxed at some point. Anyway, if I can be of any help at all to you in your in working out your narrative and how these characters are playing out in your own chart, then just go to feelgoodastrology.com/store and book some time with me, and we can sit down and work through it. We can see how Saturn and Jupiter, or Satan and Jesus, whichever way you want to have them, and Uranus are working out in your charts and are creating the backdrop for the adulting of us, and also possibly our salvation. So anyway, lots and lots of love to you as you navigate this time. Hope it goes well, and speak to you real soon. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've enjoyed it, please do share. And I'd love to hear your comments. And like I said, I haven't been able to see any comments in the chat box, but I think it's because I'm using StreamYard and I'm not 100% sure about how to work it. So if you have made any comments at all, I will respond to you in a private message. Anyway, lots of love. Bye for now. Take care.